Now, when I say the movement of water, we're going to find that this is referring to the movement of water at the cellular level. Okay? So the osmolarity of the blood will be able to affect what will happen at the tissue level, at those actual cells. So if the osmolarity is too high, all right, it will not only be affecting what will occur at the tissue level. Another thing that we're going to find with osmolarity is how it's going to affect our blood pressure, which of course is going to come into play on how much work that's going to be putting on the heart. Okay, so we'll be continuing with osmolarity. And then, of course, how it will affect if osmolarity, if it's too low. Okay, once again, we're going to find it will affect what happens at that tissue level and the blood pressure. Okay, so osmolarity is important, and you know, like Nicole said, it's easy now to kind of read results because the way that they put stuff in results and reports. But hopefully, you know, of course, the doctors and everything looking at it will know how to address the issues if they're present. Okay, but we'll get into what happens with that in the chapter on blood vessels. We'll see osmolarity come back. Do you happen to remember the term a colloid? Okay. Now, one of the things when it talked about solutions could be a colloid, meaning that the whole particle is present. All right? Well, we know that for blood, we have whole particles that are present, okay? Because we've got red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, proteins. We've got whole pieces. So that would tell us that this is a colloid. So they actually can have a way to see what is the protein contribution to this movement of water. Because sometimes the one that's a very common test is albumins, mainly because of albumins indicating something that could possibly be wrong with the liver. Okay, so they can actually do a test that will look for protein pressure, too high, too low. Okay, and that can be indicative of something going on with the liver, which we don't want. I mean, I don't know if you guys know anything. The liver, whew, man, everything that it does, mind-boggling. We don't want things going wrong with the liver. We don't want to overtax it either. So, meaning like drinking and stuff like that, because that actually overtaxes it to get it to have to detoxify the blood, okay? And you end up having, like, you know, cirrhosis and stuff like that. You don't want to overtax that liver too much. Blood production. All right, so this is where some of the terms are going to come in, giving us that erythro and leuco, okay? The blood production, we are continuously making the blood cells, making the red blood cells. We are doing that, your body is doing that at astronomical rates. The typical adult, we produce about 400 billion platelets per day, 200 billion RBCs, 10 million WBCs. Now, don't get me wrong, I'd like that amount in money, but hey, okay? I'll take it in the red blood cells, because the red blood cells are what they do. White blood cells, all of it. So, when we say that we get the production of blood and formed elements, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, okay? It's termed hemopoiesis. I know. Somebody was invented in the lab that day. The tissue of the body that we're going to have this occur in, we refer to it as the hemopoietic tissue. Gotta give kudos for the term, making it sound poetic. Okay? Hemopoietic. It begins at the time of forming of the yolk sac. Egg and sperm meet, fertilization occurs, one becomes two, two. We begin at the point of the yolk sac. In that point, it creates what is called blood islands. Because we've got to give rise to the red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. So they're going to form islands that produce primitive stem cells. Very early in embryonic development, this is occurring. Stem cells, okay, they don't know what to do until they receive the chemicals that tell them what to do. So as embryos are forming, as we are turning into the offspring, okay, the islands migrate to the bone marrow of the offspring, to the liver, to the spleen, and to the thymus. During embryonic development, after birth, it's only bone marrow. The spongy part of bone. Do you guys remember that? Okay. In development, red bone marrow produces all 7 formed elements. It's termed myeloid, okay, hemopoiesis. As we're growing, as blood cells are formed, and some of them have to migrate to continue becoming mature. They will need to go to the thymus gland and lymph tissue. But the formation is going to be the red bone marrow. And once the cells that need to go, for example, to the thymus gland, the T cells, that was in our endocrine system, okay? Thymopoietin, the thymus gland, okay? The hormone it releases will affect the immature T cell that came there. And then once it matures, it gets released into the bloodstream and for the most part goes and sits in a lymph node. B cells that get to the lymph node, they have the ability to proliferate when we need them on an area of the lymph node. So in the beginning, embryonic development, you see that we involve the bone marrow, the liver, the spleen, the thymus. After birth, okay, once things are going to begin to grow and develop, we depend on thymus and lymph tissue for helping the cells, a couple, T and B, to mature. Well, B cells will mature in the blood. T cells will mature in the thymus, but B cells will go to the lymph nodes. It's really interesting, okay? So red bone marrow. In children, almost all of the bones, almost all of the red marrow in the bones of children is active, producing red blood cells. As an adult, only some of our flat bones, maybe just a little bit, we don't have a lot that still produces once we reach full growth. So, if we think back to how we're going to get to this, we have little islands. We got to have a stem cell. The stem cell receives information to give rise to. That's what stem cells do, okay? So, in the case of getting what we need for the blood, we have a cell that is considered one big, huge stem cell. It's our hematopoietic stem cell, an HSC. This is known as the common origin because it's going to give rise to everything else. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, we say that this cell is also multipotent or pluripotent. Multi meaning more than one, pluri meaning more than one, because it's the common origin for more than one cell. Does that make sense?
So those terms are interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I wish they would have just kept it pluripotent. That's what I learned many years ago. And somewhere somebody threw in the multipotent, and I'm like, just leave it pluri. I mean, we know what plural means. Now, what this is going to do, that one great big huge stem cell, it gives rise to a colony. Embryonic, we called it an island. As an adult, we're going to call it a colony. Everybody's familiar with a colony, right? Okay? So, I have to give rise to red blood cells, white blood cells. Does everybody follow me? Okay? So now, what's going to happen is it's going to form some colonies. I'm going to have a colony for my L's, lymphocytes, and I'm going to have a colony for monocytes. Y'all see the L and the M? Okay? From that colony for lymphocytes, which are white blood cells, okay, I get my T cells and my B cells. Then, if I have the colony for my remaining cells, okay, from that colony, I will get red blood cells, platelets, and the other white blood cells. Yes, no, maybe.
I think so.
Okay? Just stem cells giving rise to their cells. For blood